Hello. Good morning, everybody. How are you today? We are back for another Bible reading story. For those of you who may be joining one of these videos for the first time, let me tell you what we do here. We are going through the different stories of the Bible. This is for people who have either never read the stories in the Bible, don't remember them, maybe they've only heard bits and pieces of them. Whatever the reason is, now you can know what the stories in the Bible actually say. Not just what somebody may have told you about the stories or what you think you know, but what they actually say. And right now, we have been going through the book of 1 Samuel. And many people know the story of David and Goliath. They know that David took a slingshot, tossed some stones, it hit Goliath in the head and killed him. But they don't know everything about that story. And we have just gotten up to the point where David is now in the king's court. He is now in King Saul's court. He got there because God had decided to strip Saul of his kingdom and give it to David. Now, Saul doesn't realize this yet, and really neither does David. But David has been anointed by a priest named Samuel to become king. And the reason Saul's court was ripped away from him is because Saul kept disobeying God. He did things that were against what God wanted him to do. So now Saul is being tormented by this evil spirit day and night. And the only way that he gets any relief from this tormenting spirit is when David comes and plays the lyre for him. He plays soothing music and it calms Saul's soul down. So now he has come to trust David and he has made David his armor bearer. Now we are going to start with chapter 17 in 1 Samuel. And it is a rather long chapter. Normally I would break up such a story into two parts just to save you some time. But I want you to get the whole meat of this story because it's one of the most popular stories that people know from the Bible. And I want you to get it in its entirety without missing anything. So we're going to dive right in. We're going to read the entire story found in 1 Samuel chapter 17 of David versus Goliath. The Philistines gathered their forces for war at Socoh in Judah and camped between Socoh and Azekah in Ephraim. Saul and the men of Israel gathered and camped in the valley of Elah. Then they lined up in battle formation to face the Philistines. The Philistines were standing on one hill and the Israelites were standing on another hill with a ravine between them. Then a champion named Goliath from Gath came out from the Philistine camp. He was 9 feet 9 inches tall and wore a bronze helmet and bronze scale armor that weighed 125 pounds. There was also bronze armor on his shins, and a bronze javelin was slung between his shoulders. His spear shaft was like a weaver's beam, and the iron point of his spear weighed 15 pounds. In addition, a shield bearer was walking in front of him. He stood and shouted to the Israelite battle formations. "Why do you come out to line up in battle formation?" he asked them. "Am I not a Philistine, and are you not servants of Saul? Choose one of your men and have him come down against me. If he wins in a fight against me and kills me, we will be your slaves. But if I win against him and kill him, then you will be our servants and our slaves and serve us." Then the Philistines said, "I defy the ranks of Israel today. Send me a man so we can fight each other." When Saul and all Israel heard these words from the Philistine, they lost their courage and were terrified. Now David was the son of the Ephrathite from Bethlehem of Judah named Jesse. Jesse had 8 sons, and during Saul's reign was already an old man. Jesse's 3 oldest sons had followed Saul to the war, and their names were Eliab the firstborn, Abinadab the next, and Shammah the third. And David was the youngest. The three oldest had followed Saul, but David kept going back and forth from Saul to tend his father's flock in Bethlehem. Every morning and evening for 42 days the Philistines came forward and took his stand. One day Jesse had told his son David, "Take this half bushel of roasted grain along with these 10 loaves of bread for your brothers and hurry to their camp. Also take these 10 portions of cheese to the field commander. Check on the well-being of your brother and bring a confirmation they are with Saul and all the men of Israel in the valley of Elah fighting with the Philistines." So David got up early in the morning, left the flock with someone to keep it, loaded up, and set out as Jesse had charged him. He arrived at the perimeter of the camp as the army was marching out to its battle formation, shouting their battle cry. Israel and the Philistines lined up in battle formation, facing each other. David left his supplies in the care of the quartermaster and ran to the battle line. When he arrived, he asked his brothers how they were. While he was speaking with them, suddenly the champion named Goliath, the Philistine from Gath, came forward from the Philistine battle line and shouted his usual words, which David heard. When all the Israelite men saw Goliath, they retreated from him, terrified. Previously, an Israelite man had declared, "Do you see this man who keeps coming out? He comes to defy Israel. The king will make the man who kills him very rich and will give him his daughter. The king will also make the family of the man's father exempt from paying taxes in Israel." David spoke to the men who were standing with him. "What will be done for the man who kills the Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel? Just who is this uncircumcised Philistine, that he should defy the armies of the living God?" The troops told him about the offer, concluding, "That is what will be done for the man who kills him." David's oldest brother, Eliab, listened as he spoke to the men, and he became angry with him. "Why did you come down here?" he asked. "Who did you leave those few sheep with in the wilderness? I know your arrogance and your evil heart. You came to see the battle." "What have I done now?" protested David. "It was just a question." Then he turned from those beside him to others in front of him and asked about the offer. The people gave him the same answer as before. What David said was overheard and reported to Saul. So he had David brought to him. David said to Saul, "Don't let anyone be discouraged by him. Your servant will go and fight the Philistine." "But," Saul replied, "you can't go fight this Philistine. You're just a youth, and he's been a warrior since he was young." David answered Saul, "Your servant has been tending his father's sheep. Whenever a lion or a bear came and carried off a lamb from the flock, I went after it, struck it down, and rescued the lamb from its mouth. If it reared up against me, I would grab it by its fur, strike it down, and kill it. Your servant has killed lions and bears. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, for he has defied the armies of the living God." Then David said, "The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine." Saul said to David, "Go, and may the Lord be with you." Then Saul had his own military clothes put on David. He put a bronze helmet on David's head and had him put on armor. David strapped his sword over the military clothes and tried to walk, but he was not used to them. "I can't walk in these," David said to Saul. "I'm not used to them." So David took them off. Instead, he took his staff in his hand and chose 5 smooth stones from the wadi and put them in the pouch in his shepherd's bag. Then, with his sling in his hand, he approached the Philistines. The Philistine came closer and closer to David, with the shield bearer in front of him. When the Philistine looked and saw David, he despised him because he was just a youth, healthy and handsome. He said to David, "Am I a dog that you come against me with sticks?" Then he cursed David by his gods. "Come here," the Philistine called to David, and I'll give your flesh to the birds of the sky and the wild beasts. David said to the Philistine, you come against me with a sword, spear, and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord of armies, the God of the ranks of Israel. You have defied him. Today the Lord will hand you over to me. Today I'll strike you down, remove your head, and give the corpse of the Philistine camp to the birds of the sky and the wild creatures of the earth. Then all the world will know that Israel has a God. And this whole assembly will know that it is not by sword or by spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's. He will hand you over to us. When the Philistines started forward to attack him, David ran quickly to the battle line to meet the Philistine. David put his hand in his bag, took out a stone, slung it, and hit the Philistine on his forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell face down to the ground. David defeated the Philistine with a sling and a stone. David overpowered the Philistine and killed him without having a sword. David ran and stood over him. He grabbed the Philistine's sword and pulled it from its sheath and used it to kill him. Then he cut off his head. When the Philistines saw that their hero was dead, they fled. The men of Israel and Judah rallied, shouting their battle cry, and chased the Philistines to the entrance of the valley and to the gates of Ekron. Philistine bodies were strewn all along the Sheralim road to Gath and Ekron. When the Israelites returned from the pursuit of the Philistines, they plundered their camps. David took Goliath's head and brought it to Jerusalem, but he put Goliath's weapons in his own tent. When Saul had seen David going out to confront the Philistine, he asked Abner, the commander of the army, "Whose son is this youth?" "Your Majesty, as surely as you live, I don't know," Abner replied. The king said, "Find out whose son this young man is." When David returned from killing the Philistine, Abner took him and brought him before Saul with the Philistine's head still in his hand. Saul said to him, "Whose son are you, young man?" "The son of your servant Jesse of Bethlehem," David answered. And that is the end of chapter 17. Wow, what a chapter. So there are three ways that we look at scripture when we read it. What does it say? We have to have reading comprehension. We have to know the words on the page. What was it saying to the people of that time? What was the history and the culture? What was going on in context? And what, if anything, is it saying to us today? So let's unpack this because there's a lot there. We just read that David's father tells him, "Hey, go check on your brothers. There's this giant Philistine named Goliath, and he is taunting all of the Israelites. They've gone out to battle against the Philistines, but the battle has come to a halt because they're afraid. This giant Goliath, he's 9 feet, 9 inches tall, almost 10 feet tall, comes out. He's heavily armored. His armor altogether weighs nearly 150 pounds, and he's heavily armored. Plus, he has somebody in front of him who's carrying a shield. And he taunts them and he says, "Anybody who kills me will be your slaves. But if I kill you, if I kill the person that comes against me, then you all have to be our slaves." So it's a game to Goliath. And in some ways, you get the idea that he's kind of looking forward to the challenge. Well, David's father, Jesse, tells him, "Go check on your brothers. They're at this battlefield, and bring them some food, and then come back and report to me and tell me how they're doing." So David goes down there. Now, he doesn't know about Goliath. He doesn't know any of that. And while he's down there, he overhears them talking about this Philistine, and that Saul has said whoever kills this Philistine will get to marry his daughter and will be rich, and that person's father won't have to pay taxes. So David hears all of that, and he says, "Well, why are you guys afraid of him? If God is on your side, just go get him." And his older brother hears that and gets angry. And he says, "You just came here to spy on us, didn't you?" And David's like, I didn't do anything wrong. I mean, I overheard you guys talking, and this is what I think. David leaves and he goes to Saul and he tells Saul, he says, look, God is with us. If God is with us, we will prevail. Let me go fight the Philistine. So Saul, for whatever reason, he looks at him, he says, you're just a little boy. And this Goliath guy, he's been battling his whole life. You're not a warrior. David says to him, no, I'm not a warrior, but as a shepherd, I had to fight lions and bears with my bare hand in order to save my father's sheep. And I won. I killed a lot of lions and a lot of bears. And the same God that gave me the strength to kill those lions and those bears will be with me to kill this giant Philistine. So Saul, for whatever reason, says, okay, go ahead. In fact, take my armor and put it on and go fight. Well, David puts on all of this armor. Now, it's heavy armor. I mean, it's a heavy helmet. It's a heavy shield. It's a heavy sword. And he's like, I can't even walk in this stuff. I can't move. I'm not used to this. I'm taking this off. So he takes it off because David knew that the only armor that he really needed was God. That if God was with him, he was going to win. So he loaded up the weapon that he knew how to use, which was his slingshot. He got 5 smooth stones. He put it in his pouch. He goes out to the battlefield. Now, when Goliath, this giant Goliath, sees him, he's like disappointed. You get the idea that he's really disappointed. He's like, what am I, a dog that you're just going to come at me with some sticks and stuff? I think Goliath was looking for a formidable opponent that he could fight. But instead, there's David. So David explains to Goliath in no uncertain terms that God will deliver you into my hands today so that everybody will know. David didn't say that way you'll know that I'm the most powerful warrior on the planet. He said that way you will know that God is God and that he's powerful. He gave all of the credit and all of the glory to the upcoming victory to God before he even got the victory. So he puts the stone in his slingshot. He takes one shot. He hits Goliath right smack in the forehead. Goliath falls forward. And David runs up to Goliath, pulls out Goliath's sword, because David didn't have one, pulls it out of his sheath, chops off Goliath's head, just like he said he was going to do. After that, Saul finds out who David's father is, presumably to make sure that David's father does not have to pay taxes as he promised. And that's where this story ends. It isn't always that we have some practical application come out of a story, but in this particular case, it is clear that what we learn here is when God is on our side, when we give God credit, when we trust in the Lord to fight our daily battles, then we can be victorious, and only then. Not when we take credit on our own. Not when we try to do things on our own strength. And certainly not by living in fear. David wasn't afraid because he knew God was on his side. And if you know that God is on your side and God has told you to do something and you do it, then you can be assured that it will turn out just the way God intends for it to turn out. It is important that we learn, like David, to give God credit for the things in our lives. Not take credit on our own, not boast of our own abilities, but boast on God's abilities through us. So that's the practical application there. I hope you got to hear the entire story, and maybe for some of you for the first time. Maybe the only thing you knew is that David killed a giant with a slingshot. Maybe you didn't know all the other stuff around there. I hope you learned something today, and I look forward to continuing through the book of 1 Samuel with you. Until then, God bless. See you later. Have a good day.